Welcome to Pain into Power with Boss Lady T. My name is Teresa Stott. I'm a mother. I'm a survivor of an apartment fire, and this podcast exists because the truth deserves time, context, and documentation, not just headlines. Every episode of this podcast is based on my lived experience, video evidence, and public records. I want to be very clear before we begin. I am not here to accuse. I am here to show, explain, and ask questions that remain unanswered. Today's episode is about one moment in time, 10:05 p.m., and what the video from that moment does and does not show. If you're watching this episode, you will see documents and video clips displayed on screen if you're listening. I will describe exactly what is happening so you can follow along. The fire occurred on April 19th, 2025, the night before Easter. My oldest daughter and I were at home in our apartment at Botsford Place Terrace Apartments in Farmington Hills, Michigan. What you are about to hear and see is not something recreated after the fact. This is real-time footage recorded as events were unfolding. On screen right now, you're seeing a video timestamped at 10:05 p.m. This timestamp is important because it establishes when the events you're about to hear occurred, before firefighters arrived, before any official response was on scene.
Oh, come on. Mama, don't go back in there. Come on.
What Eli, get out, get out.
Oh, come on. Mama, don't go back in there. Come on.
What Eli, get out, get out.
I want to slow this down and walk you through it carefully. At 10:01 p.m., I had already noticed smoke coming through my bathroom ceiling vent, and I had already called 911. The video you're seeing now captures the atmosphere inside the building, not just inside my unit, but in the hallway. Let's listen closely again. What you hear is movement. What you hear is voices. What you hear is people reacting. What you do not hear is equally important. You do not hear any smoke alarms.
What Eli, get out.
Now I'm going to focus on a specific moment, a 10-second clip that is difficult for me to watch as a mother, but important to share. In this clip, you see my daughter running back upstairs to her bedroom to grab shoes for herself and for me. Let me say this clearly. No child should never be running toward danger in an emergency. She did that because there was confusion, not clarity, because there was panic, not guidance. As she runs, listen again. You hear neighbors yelling for their families. You hear doors opening. You hear footsteps pounding the hallway. These are sounds of people realizing something is wrong on their own. And once again, there are no audible alarms. I want to talk about what that hallway noise represents. When alarms function properly, they provide direction. They tell people when to leave. They tell people where danger is. What you hear in the hallway is the opposite of order. You hear uncertainty. You hear parents calling for kids. You hear people rushing without instruction. That matters. I've been told publicly that alarms were working. I'm not disputing statements with opinions. I'm placing video evidence next to those statements and letting listeners decide. After the fire, Statements were released indicating the smoke alarms activated and functioned as intended. I want to be very responsible here. I am not saying what anyone believed at the time. I am not saying what anyone assumed. What I am saying is this. The video recorded at 10:05 p.m. does not capture any audible alarm activation inside my unit or in the hallway. That creates a question. And when a question involves life safety, that question deserves to be examined, not dismissed. This moment matters for two reasons. First, because alarms save lives, seconds matter, directions matter. Second, because documentation matters. When public statements and personal evidence don't align, accountability begins with transparency. This is why I requested records. This is why I documented everything. This is why this podcast exists. Now I want to transition to the next set of images you're seeing on the screen. These are photographs taken during the active fire response. What the photos show is in these images, you can see Farmington Hills firefighters actively fighting the fire from the exterior of the building. I want you to pay close attention to where they are positioned. The firefighters are located directly over my unit, specifically at my windows on the top left side of the building. This is not a random angle. This is not a different building. This is my unit. I'm showing this for a specific reason. Earlier, I described smoke coming through my bathroom ceiling vent on the second floor. These images visually connect to that experience because the fire activity was occurring above and around my apartment. This is what it looks like when you lived experiences aligns with physical evidence. Smoke doesn't travel magically. Fire behavior follows structure, wiring, and concealed spacings. Remember, the emergency calls were made around 10 o'clock p.m. The earlier video you saw was time-stamped at 10:05 p.m., showing no audible alarms. These photos come after that. Once that fire had grown to the point that exterior suppression was required. I'm not here to speculate. I'm showing what happened, where it happened, and how it connects. Photos don't have emotions. They don't exaggerate. They simply document. This is the moment I realized my home was no longer safe and that everything inside was at risk. This wasn't just a fire scene. This was my life. Here we have FOIA documents I requested from the city of Farmington Hills, covering the property at 27901 Independence Street, Botsford Place Terrace Apartments, from 2015 to 2025. These documents include building permits, electrical and mechanical inspections, code enforcement reports, and post-fire documentation. Right away, let's note something important. There are gaps in these records. When things went wrong over the years, repairs were supposed to be documented. Permits, inspections, and enforcement actions could have been logged consistently. But as we go through these pages, you'll see there are years where issues existed, but we don't see any follow-up or clear resolution. This is an early indication that the system was failing, both the property owners and the city. Page 1 is the official FOIA response letter from the city clerk. Here, the city confirms that they could provide some records, but other records were denied because they do not exist. Already that raised a concern. If these incidents happened, but there is no record, how could the city have ensured safety for the tenants? The missing information is critical because it shows gaps in accountability. Moving to the permits in 2016, we have a tear-off and re-roof permit. Inspectors noted structural issues with the ceiling and roof, and while partial approvals were given, it's clear not all issues were corrected. Imagine living in a building with ceiling and roof problems that remained unresolved. That's a serious safety risk, and it's documented here. The next pages show electrical work for water heaters and boiler control panels. Some items were only partially approved, others were disapproved with multiple deficiencies. Corrections were required, yet they were not fully completed. This is not a small oversight. This is a systematic negligence. The building had known electrical hazards that could pose fire risk, and the city had these inspections documented but allowed partial completion. Now let's look at the code enforcement reports. In 2018, there are multiple complaints regarding junk vehicles on the property, some with flat tires, some expired. These are repeated inspections and notices, yet the issues persist. This is a pattern of neglect. A responsible property owner and city enforcement system should have addressed these violations promptly. The fact that these violations continued shows a lack of enforcement and oversight. Between 2018 and 2024, the FOIA shows continued enforcement issues, including expired and inoperable vehicles, as well as other repeated safety violations. These pages indicate ongoing property neglect. Yet there are no records showing consistent follow-up or enforcement that led to permanent solutions. This is critical because it shows a decade of negligence that went uncorrected, and that negligence contributes to unsafe conditions for tenants. Then we come to 2025, the year of the fire. We see a temporary electrical service permit issued after the April 19 fire. The documents show final electrical inspections for the temporary service were approved. But remember, that is after the building had already burned. So the fire didn't happen in a vacuum. The city had records of years of unresolved hazards, yet allowed the property to continue operating in an unsafe condition. Here's what's not shown in these reports. There is very little documentation of routine follow-up to ensure tenant safety. No evidence that previous partial approvals were revisited, and gaps in inspection from year to year. When you look at the timeline from 2015 to 2025, there are periods where serious problems existed, but no record of corrective action exists. That is significant. It shows not just building neglect, but failure of city oversight. What this FOIA report shows at its core is a pattern of negligence. The building had known structural, mechanical, and electrical issues for nearly a decade. Code enforcement repeatedly found violations, but allowed them to persist. The city was aware of these issues, and by allowing them to go unresolved, they put tenants at risk. And let's be clear, this isn't just about the property owner. The city of Farmington Hills had a responsibility to protect residents. Inspectors had documented issues, permits showed deficiencies, and enforcement records showed repeated violations. Yet, they allowed these conditions to continue for years. That is unacceptable. Tenants' lives were at risk, and families like mine paid the price. Finally, The FOIA summary page I prepared brings it all together. It shows every record we have, highlights the partial approvals, repeated violations, and unresolved safety issues, and makes it clear that this is not a one-time mistake. This is a decade-long pattern of negligence that directly contributed to the fire that destroyed my home and belongings. So, as you look at these FOIA pages, pay attention to what's documented, what's partially approved, and what's missing entirely. This report is evidence of systematic failure. It's proof that the city of Farmington Hills allowed hazards to exist, putting tenants at risk for years. And now we're dealing with the devastating consequences. This is why accountability matters. These documents shows years of warnings, neglect, and failure to act. And as we continue with this podcast, we'll dive deeper into the owners, the Instagram and TikTok star involved, and the larger patterns of how Black families were ignored in the media. This is just the beginning of uncovering the truth, and it's clear the system failed us. Thank you so much for listening to this first episode of Pain into Power with Boss Lady T. I appreciate each and every one of you for taking the time to hear my story, see the evidence I've uncovered, and understand the truth behind what happened to me and my daughters. If you want to keep up with everything I'm sharing, make sure you follow me on Facebook at Reese Stott, Instagram at Boss Lady T22, TikTok at Boss Lady T228, and on YouTube at Boss Lady 313 slash E4Z. This is where you'll get the latest updates, behind the scene content, and more insights into my journey fighting for justice. In the next episode, we're going deeper. I'll be breaking down the insurance company switch right before the fire, the environmental lien that was filed months prior, and the maintenance man who moved out just 2 days before the fire, revealing even more about the negligence and the cover ups. You don't want to miss it because this is more than just a fire. It's about accountability, exposing corruption, and making sure our voices are heard. So subscribe, hit that notification bell, and follow me on all my platforms. Together, we're turning pain into power. I'll see you in the next episode.